Assalamualaikum to all my beloved lecturers. My name is Muhammad Azis and this is my video presentation for SIF1006 or Practical Physics 1. The first experiment is O2, which is refraction of light. This experiment uses a prism to study the refraction of light and dispersion. Refraction of light occurs when the electromagnetic wave passes from one medium to another, causing it to change speed and direction. This bending of light is due to the difference in optical density between the two media. The degree of refraction depends on the angle at which the light enters the new medium and the refractive indices of the medium involved. Meanwhile, dispersion is the separation of light into its component colors due to varying refractive indices. In this experiment, I first ensured the spectrometer was adjusted to the correct position. Then I measured the angle of a prism. After that, I had to find the angle of deviation of each different color. We all know that when a parallel light from a slit passes through a prism, it is dispersed into a spectrum of colors. From my observation, each color has a specific wavelength and these wavelengths have the angle of deviation. One thing to take note of is to be precise in measuring the angles using these two verniers. After getting the results, I made a graph of the angle of deviation versus wavelength. This graph is important because it determines the angles of the three Fraunhofer lines. From here, I managed to find the refractive indices, the dispersion and the dispersive power. In conclusion, the dispersion that I got in this experiment is negative 1390.3 per centimeter with a 1.3% relative uncertainty, whereas the dispersive value is 3.23 times 10 to the power of negative 2 per centimeter with a whopping 59.13% relative uncertainty. Maybe it is because of the sensitivity of measurements to small variations in angle and wavelength. Experiment M2, rigidity modulus of wire by using the Maxwell needle method. What I learned from this experiment is to determine the rigidity modulus of a wire, basically how the elasticity shear stiffness of the wire is, also known as the shear modulus. The modulus of rigidity is measured using the SI units, Pascal. Firstly, I hung a nickel wire on a retort stand and checked to ensure there were no wrinkles on the wire. The Maxwell needle is filled with 4 cylinders, 2 hollow and 2 solid, using 2 types of arrangements. Next, I attached the Maxwell needle to the other end of the wire. After that, I spun the Maxwell needle to calculate the time of the 10 oscillations. These two arrangements affect the period of a single oscillation of the needle. Lastly, I repeated the previous steps using different lengths of the wire. So these are the results I obtained. From the graph, I found out that the relation is the length of the wire is proportional to the difference between the time of the first arrangement squared and the second arrangement squared, and the gradient is needed to calculate the rigidity modulus of the wire. In conclusion, the rigidity of the wire in this experiment is 73.09 gigapascal, whereas the actual value of a nickel metal is 76 gigapascal. The percentage error is 3.82%, which is small. The third experiment is AC3, which is known as series resonance circuit. The objective of this experiment is to find the resonance frequency by studying the characteristics of the RLC series resonance circuit. A resonance circuit consists of 3 elements, which are resistance, inductance and capacitance. When these 3 elements are arranged in series, it becomes an RLC series circuit. Next, capacitance reactance or XC refers to the capacity of an inductor to store energy in its magnetic field, while inductive reactance XL is the opposition that an inductor provides to the change in current passing through it. Both these inductive elements can be obtained using these formulas. The resonance frequency of an AC circuit is the frequency at which the XC and XL are equal in magnitude but opposite in phase, causing them to cancel each other out. At this frequency, the circuit exhibits purely resistive impedance, leading to maximum current flow and minimal impedance. Firstly, I arranged the circuit as shown in this figure. I set the resistance at the signal generator of impedance at 10 ohms, and later determined the currents at different frequencies. These steps are then repeated using 20 and 50 ohms. From what I observed, the current from the ammeter is at maximum at a certain frequency. That is actually the resonance frequency. Also, I noticed the difference between the frequency in the signal generator and the frequency displayed in the oscilloscope. One of the factors is because of the errors of the instruments. Then I made a graph that consists of 3 lines for the 3 different resistance. Lastly, I compared the resonance frequency in my experiment with its theoretical value. In this experiment, I got 2591.3 Hz, which has an 11.62% difference from the actual value of 2321.5 Hz. Now the fourth experiment is MP1, which is photovoltaic cell. The objective of a photovoltaic cell experiment is to investigate the efficiency and performance of photovoltaic cells in converting light energy into electrical energy under different distances and angles of incidences. A photovoltaic cell is a semiconductor device that converts light directly into electricity through the photovoltaic effect. When photons from sunlight strike the semiconductor material of the cell, they generate an electric current by dislodging electrons, producing a flow of electricity. This experiment has two parts. The first part is to find the relation of the distance between the photovoltaic cell and the light source and the current flow from the photovoltaic cell. The currents were recorded from a distance of 2200 cm with an interval of 5 cm. After I got the result, I made a graph from the two variables. From what I observed, the current is directly proportional to the inverse of distance squared. The gradient is 3.81 microampere meter squared with a 0.76% relative uncertainty. In the second part, I needed to find the relation of the angle of incidence of light and also the current flow from the photovoltaic cell. The photovoltaic cell is placed 50 cm from the light source. Two different results are obtained, one with a range of 10 to 60 degrees with a 10-degree interval, the other ranging from 5 to 85 degrees with a 5-degree interval. Two different graphs of the cosine angle of incidence versus the current are made. The first gradient is 15.55 microamperes with a 15.37% relative uncertainty, whereas the second gradient is 15.18 microamperes with a 4.64% relative uncertainty. The second gradient is much more precise because its angle interval is the half the first gradient. To conclude, the current is proportional to the angle of deviation. From what I observed, not all angles of deviation are valid. The light can't reach the photovoltaic cell if the angle between them is above 90 clockwise and anti-clockwise degrees, hence producing no current flow. For the last experiment, which is AC1, oscilloscope as a voltmeter. For this last experiment, the objective is to evaluate the oscilloscope's accuracy in measuring voltage across DC and AC circuits compared to traditional voltmeters. An oscilloscope is an electronic device used to visualize and measure the waveform of electrical signals. It displays voltage variations over time, allowing for the analysis of signal characteristics such as amplitude, frequency, and phase. Another objective of this experiment is to determine the gain factor, which represents the amplification of a signal by the oscilloscope, indicating the ratio of output to input signal magnitude. This experiment also has two parts. The first part is oscilloscope as a DC voltmeter. Based on the circuit that I arranged, I obtained two sets of results. One is a normal circuit while the latter has the polarity of the battery and voltmeter reversed. I made a table to input the results to make two sets of graphs. I found out that the relation is the shift is proportional to the voltage. Next, I obtained the gradients for each graph to find the gain factor. The gain factor for the first circuit is exactly 1, meanwhile the second is exactly -1. From this experiment, the oscilloscope can be utilized as a DC voltmeter because the gain factor agrees with the preset value shown on the voltage scale knob on the oscilloscope within the experimental uncertainty range. The next part is the oscilloscope as an AC voltmeter. For this part, I ensured that the voltmeter was set to alternating current. By adjusting the rheostat, the voltage input differs which changes the peak-to-peak height, denoted IY. Then I find the values of the peak-to-peak voltage, VPP, and the root mean square voltage, VRMS, using the given formulas. From the results I obtained, I found two relations. Firstly, the VRMS is proportional to IY. Secondly, the VPP is also proportional to IY. Later, I determined the gradients from the two sets of graphs I made. These gradients are essential to obtain the gain factor, which I also got exactly 1. From the gain factor, I also found the relation between VPP and VRMS. In conclusion, the gain factor agrees with the set value within the experimental uncertainty. Therefore, the oscilloscope also can be utilized to measure alternating currents. So that was what I understood, gained, and learned from all these 5 experiments. Thanks for watching.